gospel lesson this morning comes to us from the gospel according to Luke, picking up after the resurrection of Jesus, chapter 24, beginning at verse 13. Now, on that same day, two of Jesus' disciples were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all the things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in word and deed before God and the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find the body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over." So he went to stay with them. When he was at table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking with us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. The word of the Lord. Well, it's that time of year again, folks. We have entered early May, and the annual Heyward quest to track down and photograph the elusive yellow lady slipper. Now, you may recall from last year that the yellow lady slipper is a wildflower that grows in the mountains around here, but which can be a real challenge to find in the wild. Again, several years ago, my family and I were taken on a hike to see the yellow lady slippers in full bloom, but have rarely been able to find them on our own, despite returning to the same area nearly every year. In fact, one year I got my entire family lost in the woods when we tried to trailblaze to a path where I was sure that the flowers were. Well, I was wrong. And we missed the path back to the main trail. We spent an hour or more walking back and forth in the woods as the afternoon wore on. It's a terrible feeling, isn't it? It's bad enough to lose one's way on a journey to a meeting somewhere, miss an event. But to be lost in the woods, the thought of night approaching, no supplies, not knowing where you are. And what's worse, it was totally unnecessary if for no other reason than the ready technology of GPS. Now, as I'm sure most of you know, GPS simply means Global Positioning System. And with a small device that you can easily buy, you can track your position and know where you are headed. Of course, no technology is fail-safe. You have to understand it, use it properly. But I sure would have loved to have had one such device on that day I got my family lost in the woods. As it turned out, however, I did have a GPS of sorts. Not a global positioning system, but a global positioning son, spelled S-O-N, who recognized the path to the main trail and got us back on track. We did not find the yellow lady slippers that day, but we didn't end up on a search and rescue reality TV show either, so we counted the day as a success. Still, I learned my lesson more or less. The lesson that I learned is to adequately prepare for any journey in life to reduce the risk of getting lost. Now, if that journey is a hike in the woods or a visit to friends in another state, I have a pretty good idea of how to prepare. Yet, how does one prepare for the journey of faith? How do you prepare to follow the path of Jesus Christ? After all, just like I easily found the yellow lady slippers when I had a guide, the disciples of Christ were able to follow as long as Christ was physically present to lead them. Yet once Christ had been arrested and taken away, they all became lost and could no more stay on the path of Christ, and I could find the yellow lady slippers despite being in familiar territory. What we need, what I want to give you today, is a means to follow Christ, even though he is not physically present here to guide us personally. I want to give you a GPS, not a global positioning system, but a gospel positioning system. And that is indeed what I believe Luke has for us today. Luke's GPS, his gospel positioning system, is the story of the disciples' encounter with the risen Christ on the road to Emmaus. In this brief encounter, Luke lets us know where we are coming from, where we are going, throws in who we are to boot. First of all, in order to know the direction we are headed, it is always helpful to know where we are coming from. Now, you may say, well, I came from home, or we come from all over. Yet there is something that we all share together, a common history, a common root. And this comes to light when we compare our position in relation to the gospel. We are coming from Holy Week and Easter. That is, like Jesus' disciples, we have been shaped and formed by the events of Jesus' passion and reports of his empty tomb. We have heard the accounts about the women who saw visions of angels who announced that Jesus is alive. Yet we were not there to see the empty tomb or the angels. So as we, like those early disciples, traveled on this journey of faith, we remember how it all began in hope and anticipation. And we begin by reflecting on what we have all heard and talked about. This, my friends, is where we are coming from. Next, where are we now? Well, again, it might seem obvious. Now we are at church. Yet once more, there is a deeper understanding to our gathering if we reflect on it in relationship to the gospel. In this light, we have come to Emmaus. For the church is the place where we gather for instruction in Scripture, like the disciples received on the road to Emmaus, and it is where we encounter the risen Christ in the breaking of bread when we celebrate communion together. The church is Emmaus when we offer hospitality to strangers. The church is Emmaus when we share table fellowship around the Lord's table in worship, but also in our study, service, and community building events. The church is Emmaus when we seek and offer guidance that will help each other stay on the path of Christ even when the road becomes rocky. You see, the church is where we are given glimpses of the risen Christ that fulfill our anticipation and confirm our faith. Like Cleopas and the other disciple, we have heard stories of Jesus' empty tomb and the witness of the women and the angel who announced that he is risen. And in the church, we arrive at Emmaus and see that Christ, alive as the reconciled community of faith in his service. So according to Luke's GPS, his gospel positioning system, we begin our journey with stories of faith. We have come to Emmaus, the church, where encounters with the risen Christ and the breaking of bread confirm our faith. But where are we headed? Where does it all lead? Again, just back home? No. Again, our destination is more than retracing our steps. We are never called to simply return to our homes after worship. Instead, the gospel leads us back into the world that has rejected Jesus Christ. For Cleopas and the other disciple, this meant returning to Jerusalem, despite the fear of continued persecution of Jesus' followers. For us now in the church, this means going back into an indifferent world that often looks down on our work and our message of hope. Yet we do not go unprepared. Instead, if we learn the language of faith and practice the principles of the church, principles such as forgiveness and reconciliation, we are prepared not only to go and share the good news, but to be the good news in the world. For in addition to telling us where we are from, where we are, and where we are going, the Luke GPS found in the story of Emmaus also tells us who we are. Now, as is often the case, of course, we like to believe we already know who we are, but once more, the gospel invites us to take a deeper look. The gospel invites you and me to not be satisfied as a spectator who simply reads about these events that took place in Emmaus. Don't you see? The gospel positions you and me as the unnamed disciple with Cleopas. For like this disciple, our hearts have burned within us when we hear the voice of Jesus in the teachings of the church. Our hearts have burned within us when we experience the risen Christ in the breaking of the bread. This is who we are. Disciples who have experienced the risen Christ in the life and worship of the church, who will go out from here with the opportunity to share that blessing in word and deed. For ultimately, Luke's GPS assures us that no matter what obstacle we face outside these doors, nothing can keep us from reaching our destination. The glimpse of the risen Christ that we find in the breaking of the bread is a foretaste of the new life to come, a new life we begin now in the church. Therefore, we are free to be a blessing to the world, to seek reconciliation, to seek to share God's forgiveness with all, to pursue social justice, to give freely to those in need, because this GPS, this gospel positioning system, shows the church where we are coming from, keeps the church on the path of faith, and assures the church that nothing can separate us from our destination in Jesus Christ. Let all God's people say,